Okay. Welcome to the Entrepreneur Mindset with a twist of holding the mustard, right? And I'm joined with Brad, my co-host. Thank you for those that are joining us. We are live on Instagram and YouTube as well. No problems today. So you must be my good luck charm, Brad, clearly. And the topic today is quite a provocative one. And I think it's going to evoke quite a bit of conversation. And I encourage those that are listening in, as you always do so beautifully, do engage with us, share your comments, your insights, your perspectives. The topic today is the God complex, and I added a bit more to it to say in entrepreneurship, yes, but in life itself. And this is really a phenomenon where individuals assume infallible authority or wisdom. And I'm not an expert on this, and I know that Brad's written a beautiful article on it. So we're going to dig right into this and what prompted you, Brad, today to decide on bringing up such a pertinent topic. And please do educate us at the starting point around more context than I have just given the audience listening in.
So the article was written, so the articles that we write that I put up onto LinkedIn is all the trials and tribulations that we go through as SMMEs. And it's funny enough, when I wrote this piece, I had just came out of a situation where I was faced with my own God complex and what it meant for me. And it made me start to believe that we all have the potential to use the God complex as a positive rather than a negative. And now and again, as business owners, we need to have that kind of attitude or approach to situations and problems in order to be able to get over that. So the article was written purely because I was really interested in the topic. I actually heard it from a colleague of mine who was giving a talk, and it made me think about it. And I started to think about narcissism in the SMME space, what that means, dealing with a narcissist. Are you perhaps the narcissist in your organization? And then it led me onto the God complex and got me to write this piece around sometimes we don't really want to ask for help. We believe we have all these solutions. We believe we're the alphas. We know our businesses. We know business. And in a way, sometimes you have to kind of break down those barriers. And that then leads into the discussion around the complex and when you need it, when you don't, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow, that's going to be quite a deep topic today, right? And it's interesting. I just got off a call with somebody where we were talking about when are we actually the villain? So the villain is also the one with the narcissistic traits. And sometimes it's beyond just having the traits. It's having a down outright disorder around that particular narcissism as such, right? So I want us to really delve in around how this mindset then affects entrepreneurs. What are the do's and don'ts? How is it serving them when they have the God complex versus when is it doing a disservice? Because I feel everything has an equal and opposite. So there's a positive in it, but there can be also a negative. So maybe just dabble in that for us.
You know what it is? I feel that, I had a whole lot of sessions with SMMEs today. And I realized that, being an SMME means you have to acquire the skills and the ability to jump in and out of not different personalities, but different approaches. And sometimes you're faced with a situation where you need to kind of bring in the God complex in order to deal with that situation. That's, a space where, in essence, God complex means you're the God. You're better than everyone else. You're on a different level. And I know that that's not always a positive thing, but I do feel like SMMEs, sometimes we don't step up to the plate. We don't have enough belief in ourselves to actually pull in the God complex and say, hang on a sec. Yeah, I know you're CEO. I know you're a big corporate and I'm a small business, but you know what? I'm going to step up into that space. I'm going to be my alpha. I'm going to be my God, and I'm going to actually move forward from there and see where that gets me. But the angle of the article was a lot of SMMEs we work with, part of the God complex is believing you don't need the help or support, believing that you have all the answers. And a lot of SMMEs that we work with find it very difficult for you to come into their space and say, but hey, have you ever thought of this? Or have you ever tried that? Or take me through your thinking here because it's not making sense. So that is the angle of the article, is when do we actually need to surrender that complex and actually ask for help? We need to step down. And that is where the discussion comes and forms in, and just from my personal experience, when you start off in business and you've got this little bit of an attitude and you're really pushing out and you think you're the alpha, you're the leader, you're the only one keeping that business together, but there's so many other players in your business. And you also need to give that a little bit of time to grow and heal, if that makes sense.
A lot of sense. I'm just going to acknowledge Farouk that's here from YouTube. Sajida is here with us on the Instagram page. Thank you for joining us. And for those that are watching the replay, please don't hesitate to also add your comments or questions, which we'll respond to later. But I just want to come back to that not asking for help is often masked with feeling like an imposter because others are going to now figure out that I might not have all the answers, right?
Mm.
Because you're saying the two sides of the coin here is that they don't ask for help because they sometimes feel like they have the answers and they don't want to bring anyone into their circle. And they're almost protective and territorial of their space. And maybe because they could have gotten burnt before through whatever collaborations or partnerships or from a corporate itself. I certainly have had experience with entrepreneurs that feel that corporates kind of latched onto ideas of theirs. And I mean, we hear many of these stories in our space, Brad, where the corporate latches onto the story and the service or the product offering. They get a bit of understanding of that IP and then they run with it. And then that small SMME feels even smaller and the God complex then, gets stronger in the not so positive way. Now, if that's the one end of it and the other end of it is not being afraid to go and ask for help and bring in others, what does it actually take? How do we show up in those moments? Do we set boundaries and we clear, or do we contract? What are the ways to not show up too arrogant and at the same time not feel like we are the imposter in our own story, in our own business?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I think from my perspective, it all boils down to the success story that you have as business owners. And that's where I always start from. Whenever we start coaching sessions or whatever we're doing talks or we're doing group sessions, always start from what is your success story? What do you believe success means for you? And to feel successful, what does that actually look like? And we've realized that a lot of SMMEs, when you start to unpack that, have very different beliefs in what success actually means for them. But if you're living your success or you believe you're striving towards that success story, you will have a sense of confidence that sometimes is mistaken as the God complex. And the key to that is just to remain confident, but very, very open to the fact that the person opposite you does not have the same success story as you, does not view things in the same way that you do. So when you approach a corporate and you have this sense of, I believe in myself, I have a lot of confidence, I'm a powerful human being, and that corporate is feeling insecure in any sort of way, or not experiencing that situation in the same way you are, you need to have that ability to pick that up. You've got to read the room. You've got to know when to enact the God complex and when not. Now, narcissists do it permanently. They don't have that ability. But as SMMEs, we do have that ability, because as SMMEs we do, unless you're a narcissist and an SMME. So that's a bit of a, weird kind of
this is what I want
cocktail.
to ask you. So if you are the narcissist, then what? If you can't discern, then what?
It's weird. I was reading this research paper about narcissism in business, and they actually make good business owners. And it's because of that ability to put themselves forward and to, always ensure that they're protected, because, that's the core of narcissism, is to protect that inner wounded child. But if we just take that out of the discussion and we look at SMMEs as a grouping and use the God complex as a tool, we can enact that when we need it. So when we feel we need to step up to the plate and we need to have that self-belief and that innate kind of feeling that, we're showing up, that is going to be really powerful for us in that situation. But if it doesn't call for it, there's no need to call it up. When we start our coaching sessions, and he said so often, and you've experienced this, it's so often that you get these business owners that are so arrogant that you actually just sit there and go, I'm here to help. And if you're not going to allow me in and allow me to support you and help you where I can, then what is the purpose of you being on this program? And that is where my thinking around the God complex came in. And like, when is it a good time and when is it not such a great time? If you're signing onto a program because you want financial support, but it comes with mentoring, and you're going to walk into that mentoring session believing that you God and that you have all the answers, you're not going to get what you need out of that session. But if you walk into a deal with a corporate who has a boardroom setting and there's 8 of them and 1 of you, that's a great time to enact the God complex, to have that innate belief and that you're the alpha, because you're going to need that as a tool. So that's my thinking. Could be completely wrong. I'm sure people disagree, but that is where I unpack that in the article for me as an SMME and for the SMMEs that I work with.
I want to go into some of that article quickly because I did save it for myself. I also know, and I'm certainly also of the opinion, is that we cannot be generative. There's a bit of a noise in the background. Is that my side? Your side?
So I live next to a hospital. It's actually a cool story. And
yes, go ahead.
Have this, it's actually a helicopter landing. It's not cool for the person that's in the helicopter because it's trauma, but it's cool for us to go out and watch. And you'll be so surprised. You think you get used to it, but you don't. Every time there's a landing, it's like the neighborhood watch goes crazy and all the kids come out and they all watch it. It's so cute. Again, not for the person in the helicopter, but for us outside, it's quite cool. Yeah. So sorry about that.
Well, I want to go into some of the actual of the article, and I want to read some of it just so that those that have just joined, thank you for joining us, Michelle and Sajida again. Please don't be so quiet. Interact with us. We're talking about the God complex here for those that have just joined us. And the description that Brad's put into his article says it refers to an unshakable belief characterized by consistently inflated feelings of personal ability, privilege, or infallibility. And according to Wikipedia, it describes a person who believes they are above others regarding knowledge, authority, or moral standing. In this context, we explore how the SMMEs, I went a bit further away, sorry about that, how it affects SMMEs. So it's like that know-it-all complex that they have. Now, I also do know from experience that sometimes because that success story hasn't been clearly defined and they don't really have a very clear vision and purpose and mission, sometimes that is just overshadowed by the know-it-all that they bring across. So I'm rather going to come across as if I have all the answers, so that it's not shaming me in a way that I actually don't yet, and I'm trying to elicit this from the environments that I'm in. Have you found that in your space?
Yeah, I think most definitely. I feel we're very scared to open up and be vulnerable as business owners, um,
Mm,
because we get kind of let down every day as a business owner in some form or the other. There's always a challenge that comes up. So now to sit opposite to someone and say, you know what, I actually don't really have this, and I feel like I know what I'm doing, but this is where I'm really lost and need support, is actually quite a difficult thing to do. Because as an
okay.
SMME, you have to show up every day. So naturally, you guarded and you're protected, and you're very protective of your business. So to come into a session with someone and say to them, "Listen, I actually don't have this. I really don't know kind of where I am right now. I feel so lost. Can you help me?" And that person guides you out of that space. I think that could be absolutely an amazing experience. But we reenact the God complex because we are being protective, because we are vulnerable, because we are, we
Mm.
have internal mindset issues that we have to deal with. So yeah, I do come across it quite often.
So how
Look,
do we
I mean, you can
mitigate the risk of the complex?
say it
Because
again.
there's far, how do we mitigate the risk of the God complex? Because, as you say, it can be to our advantage depending on the circumstances, the context, the environment. But some of the risk and the consequences of this would potentially mean walking away from partnerships, opportunities.
Yeah, I
How
mean,
do we mitigate them?
yeah, risk in the SMME space is so prevalent on so many levels that it's kind of like,
Mm,
okay, what risk am I going to have with my breakfast this morning, kind of thing. That's just how it is. So to
mm,
mitigate it, I think it's all about the balance of being an SMME. You have to understand when to pull which string at which time, and that is where it becomes very difficult. So, for example, I had an SMME 2 days ago we were working with, and they rely on one corporate for their business income. And that corporate has turned around and said to them, "We're cutting your work in half due to a myriad of reasons." And that has left that SME in a space where they're actually not making ends meet. So they're coming to month end and they're not going to make their expenses. So we all know as SMEs how that feels, right?
mm,
Now you get a team that comes in and says, "Look, we're going to support you. We're going to help you turn your business around." And you, as the business owner, enact the God complex because you want to believe or you want to portray that you are in control and that you do know what you're doing, and that you are perhaps not above, but you are perhaps more control than what people think you are, and you've got this when you actually clearly don't. So that is the risk that you put on yourself. Now we face so many external risks that we try and minimize the amount of internal risks we put onto our business. So it's very important that you got to understand and look out for the signs where you need to be more open to support and help. And that's the problem that we have as SMMEs, specifically where we live here in South Africa, is we don't really want to ask for help. Yeah, we put our names down on all those programs because we know those programs give us cash sometimes, they sponsor us vehicles, etc. But we're not
mm-hmm,
doing it because we're going in and saying, "I really, really need help and support." Out of, let's say, 50 SMMEs we work with, I would say 5 come into our stable and say, "Guys, I really need help and support. This is where I need my support. This is where I need help. Can you work with me to try and overcome this challenge?" I've had maybe 2 SMMEs in the last year that have come and said, "I used to be so good at what I do. I loved my business. I've fallen completely out of love with my business. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm so lost. Please help me." And you work with them and you realize what amazing talent they have and how well they actually know their business. And you yourself learn so much from them, but all they needed was just for someone to pull them out of that space. Now, you can't do
mm,
all of
mm,
that if you're coming from a space where you believe you are better than everyone and you are in complete control of your business. So yeah, it's tricky, very tricky.
But I mean, whether I'm in the role of facilitator or whether I'm in the role of coach or project accelerator, any of those hats that I wear, I'm always cognizant of contracting right up front and stating that whoever I'm partnering with or whichever company is that we set that up front around the rules of engagement. Isn't it then also our responsibility as business owners ourselves, as contractors, as coaches, mentors, or facilitators, that we almost need to create this awareness right at the start that the possibility of God complex emerging is very possible, and that you contract between one another, that there will be an awareness created about that, and that at what stage do we then, if the person is not willing to listen, we walk away. But it's almost you're setting the tone at the beginning. Is that not something we should look at as a responsibility for ourselves going forward? I'm just
Hmm.
thinking.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I agree with you. I agree 100%. I think we need to be very vigilant on the
Mm,
relationships we keep, the relationships we enter into. Um, Man, I actually just had such a weird experience with one of the banks that we've got an account with, and the business. You get allocated this business representative, and I don't know about anyone else, but you can never get hold of these people. And
no.
when you eventually get hold of them, I just listen to that experience. If you just you going to the bank, you putting your money into the bank, yet you've got to make an appointment at the discretion of the business rep when they're available to come talk to them about your financial needs. And when you sit
Mhm.
there, you're in an open space, so you're sharing confidential information with whoever's in earshot, and then you get this person who has obviously enacted some sort of a complex thinking and telling you how to run your business when this person's got absolutely no idea what you do. And I
Mhm.
think to, and I think to
Mhm.
myself, how did I enter into the situation? How do we get into this situation? It's because we just accept it. And that's what happens with SMMEs. 99% of the time, we sign a contract or an agreement from a point of either desperation or a point of need. I need this
Mhm.
business. I need this job. I need this income. I need this client. I need that. And then when we eliminate that and we use the power of no, that in essence is enacting the God complex because we believe we're better than this situation. And we remove ourselves from the situation. So that is my thinking is the God complex has a myriad of meanings. There's different degrees.
Mm.
It's a very in-depth, muddy concept and conversation to have. But in the space of the SMME, there's two ways that you can approach your business. You can be open to the support that you get around you and look for opportunities where you can share your journey, help others, and let them help you and help keep your mindset where it needs to be in order to run your business successfully. Or you can approach it as if you know better than everybody else.
You're
And
mentioning something right now. So sorry, were you still busy?
no, go for it, go for it.
So on the fact of mindset, on the topic around mindset, thank you, Dr. Maria, for joining us on Insta. We're talking about the God complex, Dr. Maria, so that you're in the loop. You can look at the event poster for some more details around that. But coming back to mindset, let's talk about the money mindset of SMMEs and how that influences the God complex,
Mm,
either again from a growth mindset perspective or a fixed scarcity and lack mindset. I'm finding that when the person's in scarcity or lack, God complex comes across, but it's because they're in that fear state.
mm,
Because, as you say, they're in a survival part of their brain, really, where they're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So I find that it may not be intentional during those times that the God complex comes up, but they are very much in survival. So they will want to be the subject matter expert in their business and in the future of that business to their detriment. How do we create the awareness that sometimes God complex is even related to people's money stories? And we can have a conversation on a segment on the money story, a whole segment on that, but I want to weave that in just as a little bit as a conversation point. What are your thoughts around the money story with God complex?
I agree with you, and I've, you know, it all relates back to, again, to the success story that you have written for yourself in terms of what is my expectation from the business. So if my expectation is to earn 100 grand from my business, but yet my business pays me 5 grand, you are always going to be operating from a space of need,
Mm,
because it's not aligning to your expectation. So it starts to affect your mindset. But if you are fully aligned to what the business can deliver versus what your success story is, and you can marry those together, then in my view, you're living your success. And
mm,
that not eliminates, but maybe limits the amount of times you shift into the God complex because there's no need for it.
mm.
So a narcissist
Absolutely.
will enact the God complex because they need it. It's a survival tool that they use. They have to
Mm,
be in that space. They have no other reference points. And if you take them out of the situation and you refer to it as, let's say us as SMMEs, we don't need to be in a space of constantly having to enact the God complex just because we're in survival mode.
mm,
And it happened to me. This week I've been in survival mode. There's no real reason for it. It's just
mm,
something shifted. And Monday I woke up, I was in survival mode. And it has affected the business in such a negative way that it's starting to kind of like, trickle through to all the different areas of the businesses, because we have a few
sure.
businesses. So it's very important that in order for you, in my opinion, to live your success story, you need to be open to support and help. You also need to support and help others.
Mm,
And just that alone is so important. And we just don't get that right. Let's say I go to gym, I'm training at the gym, and afterwards I'm sitting in the sauna and I've got a fellow business owner next to me, and we're starting having a conversation around business ownership. The chances of that business owner, or even for me to turn to that person and say, geez, dude, you've been a business owner for so long, I actually really need some help and support. I don't have this. I haven't got this.
mm,
Is virtually nil. So in order for us to live the success we want, in order for us to have the success stories fully aligned to our businesses, we need to understand that we cannot operate from a space that we know it all, because we don't know it all. And you will never
mm.
know it all. Your business
Exactly.
journey is from beginning to the day they put you in the grave.
Yeah, I was chatting to somebody. I was doing a talk at another company earlier this week, and I said, look, if ever anybody thinks that they are enlightened or they have all the answers, they need to think again. They need to go back to the drawing board because we don't. It's from the cradle to the grave, as you rightfully say. And I think again, values and being values aligned and all of that plays a pivotal role in how we show up, and where we won't have the need to show up with God, with the God complex, because when we are operating from that truth of our values, we're coming from an empathetic and compassionate and curious
Mm.
standpoint. We're listening with intent to understand rather than respond and be the loudest voice in the room. In fact, often we take a step back and we remain silent to rather receive, because with the receiving of that information or feedback or direction or guidance, we know that it's an opportunity to expand. And that's really what I suppose would be the strategies to create awareness when you're shifting in that God consciousness. It's almost a way of stopping self-sabotage and intercepting it and becoming aware. But when you have a blind spot to it, whether you're a narcissist or not, right? Because I sort of hate that label. I really do, because we all have narcissistic traits. If we are triggered and we are in survival, there's not a single person that I know of that does not step into that grandiosity feeling that they are more important in that moment and it's all about them and it's what they say is gold. So we just need to be mindful of the labels that we, share. And I know it's just a matter of illustrating the point around where it is most prevalent in those sort of groups of people. But if we see each other as one, we will lead with empathy. We will, even if that person does show up with the God complex, we on the other side need to remain curious and just listen, gather information, and just be fascinated, knowing that what we know is the person is not necessarily going in the right trajectory of themselves personally and professionally. So I do want to maybe just do something radically different here today, because we have a guest here that's, well, somebody that's listening in, Farouk. He said he's from the Western Cape. I know Farouk as I don't think I've ever met him personally face to face, right? But I met him through a company called Dewpoint, and he's a wealth engineer. And this guy, out of nowhere, entered my social messaging and said, "Hi, I'm Farouk, and this is what I'm all about." Not pushy, and introduced this business. It's an asset building business, and it's really a great business, quite frankly. But he didn't come from that know-it-all perspective. He was, I want to pay it forward. Here's a business model that is an income generator, that's an asset builder, and I would love to bring this across to other potential business owners or individuals so that they can become business owners, right? And not be reliant only on one source of income, which we all know today is not necessarily sufficing for our economic needs, given the high inflationary rates, etc. And I don't think it's just unique to South Africa. I think globally there is a challenge from inflation. So this is a business owner that does not come with a God conscious, but he actually is here to serve. So how do we discern? I see he's getting excited with my acknowledgements to him. And I really do feel, like I said, I've never met the guy. And I see how he serves from a place of empowering others and innovating and coming with ideas and strategies and collaborating cohesively rather than arrogantly. I've got this good idea and I'm doing very well. And if you're not coming on board, it's your thing. So I'm sharing this, Brad, because we may also be missing the boat around other entrepreneurs out there that is not your traditional SMME conventional type businesses, but are making a difference. So how do we invite people like Farouk into the fold of our spaces potentially, maybe just to bring across this point more strongly? Who's curious to learn all the time, who's curious to not know an answer. That was a mouthful, but I wanted to bring that across.
No, fair enough. First of all, I feel like you articulated what we were talking about in the session so beautifully and packaged it all nicely. So thank you for that. That's really amazing. I think it boils down to respect. So this has been my journey for this year particularly. So, also on a bit of a spiritual journey. And, in whatever your faith is spiritually, it's you never get to a point where you've reached the end. It's a consistent relationship and journey that you have, and you nurture it and you feed it. And you pay attention to it, etc. So business ownership's the same concept. But in any faith, they will teach you the respect of others. And I think that is something that's maybe missing a little bit. And that sometimes causes people to shift into that God complex space because they're not being respected. And that is something that's on us as SMMEs. We don't respect each other. We don't show respect equally to all. We are very discerning with our respect. So that is something I believe we can work on as SMMEs, is to be a lot more mindful around that person selling their stuff on the side of the road, the millies or whatever it could be, is an SMME that's in my space. And that person that owns that law firm is an SMME that's operating in my space. And they should have equal respect. Because they're going through their own issues, their own challenges, their own troubles, etc., etc. But as SMMEs, as a collective, we need to respect each other. It's something that I actually found quite big when I was staying in Italy. I found that, especially in the smaller towns, that the small business owners actually had this weird like greeting and connection with each other. It was actually a thing. It was like being part of a club, and they just knew each other. So obviously, in the small towns, everybody knows everyone's business there, but they just had this weird respect for each other, And at any time, one would reach out to the other and ask for support and help, and it would be given. Wouldn't be questioned. It would just be given. And I like to think that we don't do that enough in our own space. And I think that is something where we can work on, where Farouk can then thrive, because you've now introduced him to us. He's listening in on the session. We're probably going to connect afterwards. And we will show each other the respect that we deserve as SMMEs. And that's going to help take his journey a lot forward. Also a bit of a mouthful, but that's my thinking.
I love that you brought the angle of respect in. And I feel that here's a comment from Farouk. The session is really insightful. I'm so happy that I tuned in. We're so happy to have you here because you're a role model and a leader. And why I love that Brad is going the respect direction is because it brings across the leadership element, right? And if we leaders in our respective fields, and I'm not just talking business now, people, because whether you're a business owner or not, we're still a human being that needs to be showing up with humility, with empathy, with compassion, being in service too. That's why we exist. When we show the God complex, as you rightly say, it's because there's an unmet need for us, be it respect, be it recognition, be it acknowledgement, be it prestige or status, whatever that unmet need is, sometimes triggers people to shift into the God complex so that they can elicit that respect or that acknowledgement or that recognition or being seen and heard and understood. And so what I find, Brad, interesting is that adaptation that we take on where we shift into that territorial God complex, know-it-all state is just wanting to maybe be heard differently. So when we come across, we're actually coming across with arrogance, but actually it's not who we truly want to show up as. I don't think any human being in this day and age wants to show up in the world unless it's a personality disorder, as we highlighted. If it's NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, that is an imbalance in the brain region, chemicals, and we cannot be in judgment of it, right? But if it's just personality traits or behaviors or habits or emotions that are negative emotions and are not serving anyone in that exchange, it's a cry for help. It's a cry to be heard or to be helped. So again, I always bring it back to us. And when I say us, anybody that is consciously aware in that moment, seeing this unfold in front of their eyes, is to not go with the lens of judgment, because that is our natural default way. We go with judgment of the individual or the group that is in front of us showing up in that manner. Yet, if we flip the script and we stay in truth of our own value system to serve, we're gonna remain curious just to figure out how to support the person regardless of the God complex. But in
And also,
closing, the departure point is that there's an unmet need.
yeah, that's a very, very good point. And some perhaps I didn't view it kind of to that degree. And I get it. I understand what you're saying and agree. I think that vulnerability, to constantly have that vulnerability and be able to open up and share and allow for opportunity. So my spiritual coach at the moment was saying, opportunity is all around. It's about your awareness and your ability to connect with, your environment. But we do. I mean, you wake up in the morning and sometimes you just feel very closed up, and you feel like you need to put this complex on in order to survive the day. And you then come across someone who wants to support you and really put forward perhaps not the person you want to put forward or the angle of yourself that you want to showcase. And that creates an issue for you, and it creates the issue for the other person. And it's difficult to live in a space with mutual respect consistently. It's tough to respect a guy that's trying to sell those plastic hangers to you, knocking on your window and showing you that there's something wrong with your wheel tire. That is a business owner. Well, that's actually a huge industry, but in essence, he's a business owner. He gets a cut from the sale, right? It's difficult to show that guy respect when you're having a crappy day. So it is something we actually all have to work on. I had a very interesting, maybe you can talk me through this. I had a very interesting experience. So I have this handyman. So I'm not a very good handyman person. So I have a handyman that comes in and does odd things around the house for me. And I got him to quote on some work, and I just kind of went quiet on it. My bad. Didn't respect the situation, just didn't answer him back, and I let it be. And I reached out to him another day and I said to him, hey, bud, I've actually got a lot of new work to be done. And he actually said to me, you know what? I actually don't service your area anymore. And I knew that it wasn't the truth, because a friend of mine also uses him and she's just down the road. And I felt so rejected. I felt so bad. Okay, I initiated that because I didn't respect him enough to get back and say, no, thank you. I don't want this quote right now. And, obviously I felt better than him. I didn't need to get back to him. I was busy dealing with other stuff. But then when it came back to me, I didn't feel very nice. And it got me thinking that if you believe in karma and you're showing up everywhere in the God complex, it's kind of like you're going to have this huge amount of karma come back to you that you don't really want later on. So I think it talks to how you want to be treated. And I think if you show up in the God complex space, you're going to be treated like against what you believe you're going to be treated like. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, a lot of sense, and I just want to acknowledge you, because what I love about our conversations is your level of vulnerability. You're willing to just show up and say, I'm really crap at this. Oh, I hope LinkedIn doesn't penalize me for saying that, but you call it what it is. And that's what I love about our exchanges here, because we're not here to portray this God complex within ourselves as we're showing up in having these discussion points. We don't have all the answers. I'm deeply flawed in many ways, sometimes in my exchanges. And the reason why I keep on reminding that we are not only business owners, people that I coach as business owners, if your personal life is in misaligned or incongruent to what you're saying or portraying to be on your outside world, in your professional realm, you're not living in truth. So what then tends to happen is we're wearing these masks. It's a persona, right? And it's debilitating. It's
And it's
draining to
tiring.
come
It's
and
so tiring to
yes, it's
have to
tiring.
be there all the time. I mean, have you ever? I mean, you just have to sit at a restaurant. My favorite pastime: sit at a restaurant and watch people, because people fascinate me completely. And I'm sure I fascinate whoever's watching what I do. Well, if they do, my life is so boring. But anyway, but it's just like when these people show up with so much energy, like so much vuma, and you think, oh my God, how do you do that 24 hours a day? Like, so I think we don't have a lot of energy as business owners, I would like to believe, because we're putting everything into our businesses. So I think if we come in tune
Exactly.
to our vulnerability, and if we come in tune to the fact that we have to try and respect others and understand that we're not alone. There are other business owners. They may not be the same as us. They may not look the same as us. They may not drive the same cars as us, but they're small business owners, or they're SMMEs. And we need to respect them. We need to respect Farouk for his positioning. He's a business owner. He's out there. He's building wealth. It's amazing. Sounds like an amazing business. It doesn't align to my success story, but I respect him. I haven't even met him.
No, I'm going to let you reframe that. We've got to get you in touch with Farouk, but it's not
Yeah.
around. That's a different conversation. But I want to come back to something, because you touched on something so important for me earlier with your story, and we never got a chance to conclude on that. So yes, what we put out into the world does come back to us, but even if it comes back to us, it elevates our consciousness. You would not have had this level of consciousness right now had you not had that experience that was really discouraging and brought up triggers of abandonment and rejection. And so
Mm,
then we got to figure out, how does abandonment and rejection possibly bring up that God complex anyway? Where you show
mm,
up in that complex, but actually you just have fear of being abandoned or rejected, so you're just going to show up that way. So there's
mm.
so many different schools of thought on this and angles, as you alluded to earlier on. So I do feel it is around taking a pause and inventory about ourselves,
Mm,
because when we can see our truth and our falsehood and how we show up in the world, we will be able to identify that in others with a bit more empathy.
mm.
So I want to ask you, in terms of closing out of this conversation, because we never rehearsed this. I don't know much about this God complex. I'm shooting from the hip based on what I read and the very little research that I did, right? But given where this conversation has gone now, what would you say as closing points and nuggets and strategies for anyone, business owners and individuals alike, to consider going forward?
Okay, so the first thing is, it shouldn't be difficult to wake up and show up. If it is taking all your energy just to wake up and show up, there's something you need to be addressing. And if you don't know what that is, you need to ask for support and help. And this is where I believe as a country we really do well, is there's so much support and help out there in different forms.
Mm.
So you pick what resonates with you and you go out there and you find the core of what that issue is. Yes, running a business is challenging, um,
Mm.
but it shouldn't be difficult to wake up and show up to face those challenges. So that's the first kind of trigger where I would suggest, if that is a situation for you, stop, take a few minutes and go, okay, I need to address this. What is
Mm.
actually eating this? Eating at my energy. What is this keeping me awake at night? The other thing is that you're not alone in your struggles. And being an SMME is kind of like death, in the sense it doesn't discriminate. So
Mm.
because I'm a white SMME doesn't mean I will not have perhaps the same problems and issues um, another SMME may have.
Mm.
Because when you actually unpack the core of many of the issues in businesses, when you work with them, it all boils down to your personal experiences, what you've been exposed to as an individual. And sometimes that transcends racial barriers, financial barriers, etc., etc.
Agreed.
So,
Mm.
even if you come from a wealthy family and you start your own business and you take that struggle on your own, you are going to encounter many, many issues. So let's respect each other, kind of not based on what we look like, what we drive, how big our businesses are, but let's just respect each other for waking up, showing up as SMMEs. Then we won't
I
have to
love that.
enact that God complex.
It's just beautiful because, as you said earlier on, there are tough days. You were not in top form this week. I'm
No, not
45
at all.
and counting. As a woman at this age, hormonally, and as a single mom, there are days that I'm really
Mm,
not in top form. But what do? I just show up consistently. And I like
mm,
the fact that you also steered the conversation in being vulnerable. I use another program in which you're familiar with, which teaches around how we sabotage ourselves and how we can move out of that survival brain into the thriving state of our brain. Because when we're in a thriving state, we also know that it's okay when that saboteur of the perfectionist does show up. And
mm,
when we know we don't take action, we then are reminded to take imperfect action or little
mm,
steps, or rather have some progress than none at all.
mm,
And if our avoider saboteur comes up, we also know that, hey, what are we avoiding here? It's messages that's coming back to us. So when the
mm,
God complex shows up, we've got to discern blamelessly what actually is coming up for me in this moment.
mm,
And or better yet, if you know you're sitting in a survival state, I would advise and recommend that you almost preempt when you're going to have a conversation or have a meeting or have an exchange with somebody, what potentially might come up and how might this God complex show up and what exactly, because just by preempting it will help you to command it as and when it does show up for you.
mm, mm,
But I concur with you, Brad. It is about showing up no matter how you feel. And you've got to go and figure out what is it that you're not feeling heard, understood, or acknowledged with. And what do you need to self acknowledge and self recognize? Because when
mm,
we're seeking outside of ourselves, then lies some more data for you to go and look into. When we
mm.
want that validation, when we come with that God complex, it's almost like we want to be validated for what and for whom.
Yeah. Yeah, it's this weird thing. They had this discussion on 702 last night, um, around people's habits of buying cars and what it means for us as South Africans and the status that comes with certain brands. Um, and so this is my theory, and I could be wrong, or not wrong. I could be very opinionated, but I can't justify spending a lot of money on a car. The theory that when you show up in a certain car, it alludes to the fact that you have a certain positioning in life. So as a small business owner, we want to show our success. We're very proud of our success, right? And what we do by
Mm.
default is look to material things because that's fairly easy to do. And you would go out and buy a new Ranger when you could, or a Mercedes Benz, or sorry to name brands, but generally that's what happens. And and I think this, and we don't really pay attention to how that could actually trigger us in a bad way and actually bring in the God complex a lot quicker than what we would want. Because when you're
Mm.
driving around and you're sitting in a 3 million rand car in traffic, and next to you is a family sitting in a 200,000 rand car, does not mean you're better than them.
Okay. Mm.
That car, if that car is making you believe you're better than the people around you, you really need to address that because you're showing up in the God complex. If you're
That's
driving and the lane is 2 lanes and there's a yellow lane, and you do what all the taxis do and you go and stand in the yellow lane so that you don't have to queue with the rest of us, that's not showing me or yourself any respect. That's operating in the God complex. I'm better than everyone else. My time is more important. So I'm going to jump into this lane. I'm going to skip the 60 other cars that are waiting patiently, and I'm going to jump the 4-way because the lights are not working. I'm better than you. And we wouldn't have to do that if we didn't feel vulnerable to the point where we have to enact the God complex to protect ourselves. If we respected each other and respected each other's time, that wouldn't be happening. So respect is a very important part as an SMME. And it's a very important part of our SMME journey, is to respect yourself, understand your success story, and know that you shouldn't be reliant on where you shop, what you drive, what you wear, etc., to grow that respect and feed that inner respect. That should be coming from you as a business owner.
So I'm going to conclude, and I want to say thank you. And I've learned so much from you in this conversation, so I'm very grateful. I always learn a lot from you, Brad, and the themes and the topics that are so provocative that you bring to the conversation. So thank you for that. I want to conclude in saying that I know that respect is equally one of your biggest values, from what I can pick up, because it was a big theme throughout the conversation today. So my departure point of today's conversation is know what your value system is. Because if you know what your value system is, and you know that certain environments or people or situations is going to trigger that, stay within that value system so that you can be conscious of honoring your own value system and not coming up with a God complex, because you're not in your own truth. And that brings us down. That makes us feel, when we're alone, we end up sitting like, damn, I wish I showed up differently there. Or actually I could have said something different there, or I could have been a bit more quiet and just listened. Right? So know those values, know when you're going to be triggered by somebody else, and preempt it and almost catch yourself. And I said to somebody the other day in the talk that I did, the two wolves a fable that we know about, you're either going to feed the good wolf,
Yeah,
or the bad wolf. So you're going to feed the God complex wolf. If you feel that that's the one that needs to show up, then you got to question, where does the ego come from? Because ego is, for me, attached to the God complex. And ego's not bad, guys and ladies and gentlemen. It's there again as a reminder. It's a reminder. So that's my closing out points, Brad. Anything else you want to say before we say goodbye to everyone?
Yeah, I think what I love about these sessions is that they're not rehearsed. And sometimes I think both of us are a little moch today. So we're showing up a little moch, but we've soldiered through and we've had a great conversation. I love these chats because it feels like it's you and I chatting over a cup of coffee and sharing insights. And I always learn so much from them. So we may not hit the nail on the head in terms of resonating fully with whoever's listening in's beliefs. But if it triggers something in you and it lands something important, then our purpose is fulfilled. So just gratitude for the sessions, for our growth, the two of us, and look forward to our next session.
Yeah, me too. On that note, I'm going to end the live. Thank you, Uzu, for joining, but we are concluding today's conversation. And for everyone that's been here, thank you for always showing up. And as Brad said, we were both a bit tired, but we decided to show up. We did not cancel the session for anything. The last time I think we canceled was because it was our voting day. So there was a reason for it. But we showed up nonetheless. Kelsey, thank you for being here and for your acknowledgement. Yes, Brad is a powerful example of stepping into vulnerability and showing up each time, willing to learn And yeah, I concur. It was a wonderful session. We never realized that we might need it even more than our audience after having felt as tired as we have. So I'm going to end here, and then Brad, as usual, stay on for a
Cool.
debrief.